Okay, shall we start? Yes, okay. Fine. Hi, my name is Nicolai. I'm a freelancer from Dortmund, Germany. I mostly do front-end stuff with Drupal and a little bit of backdrop CMS. And sometimes I write about it and sometimes I talk about it. Today, I will give you lots of tiny topics within the front-end area. I start with something old, then you go over to something you can use right now, to something you can use very soon, hopefully, to some things that are far in the future. Some of those things are very easy to use. Some of those things are quite difficult if you look into it. And the idea is to give you an overview of something. It might be right for your project. You have to read it up yourself. Because I have so many topics, I will be quite fast. That doesn't matter really, because at the end I will give you a link to the slides, and the slides will contain a link list. Let's start with something old. Content security policy. I like to talk about this because I have a feeling not many people are using this. Who knows what content security policy is? Who is using this in projects? More than expected. Okay, for those of who don't know, it's a technology that is aimed to help you prevent cross-site scripting attacks on your website. And basically, you declare sources for each and everything you use. You can declare sources for images, for styles, for scripts, and so on. It is implemented usually via HTTP response headers. You can also implement it via meta elements. It looks something like this. You have a meta element, and within the content security policy, you tell them that your default source is self, which means you accept everything from your own website. And for images, here you accept everything. So the image can be hosted anywhere on the web. For media sources, and media sources mean video or audio, you only accept here example.org and example.net. And for script source, you only accept scripts that are coming from the URL that is named there. And anything else that comes from any other source, the browser will not accept. That also means if you don't put self into your sources, you will not see your own CSS or your own scripts. If you start with this is quite annoying, but it's actually quite helpful because you can prevent modules from loading anything you don't know about. Last year, or maybe 2 years ago, we had some problems in Germany with WordPress sites that were sued because the WordPress sites were loading fonts from Google. And if you had a content security policy, that would not have happened because you simply would not have allowed this as a source for your fonts. So that is quite helpful because you never know what modules load what in the background. You can prevent editors from adding JavaScript to Google Tag Managers. I had this case recently where we had to implement the Google Tag Manager on the website. And because Google Web Tag Manager is in, they can add any other scripts within Google that you don't necessarily know about. And in that case, they put in so many JavaScript stuff that loading the start site took about 5 seconds, which was way too long. And then we found out that they just edited. They had added 3 scripts within Google Tag Manager, and then we had discussions with them if that is really necessary or not. Also, if your editors can put in images within the WYSIWYG editor, you might prevent them from hot-linking images from anywhere on the web. This is already quite supported quite well. And there are also 2 modules for Drupal, which makes it very easy to implement this in your own projects. There's the content security policy and the security kit. They work a little bit different, so you have to check which one would be ideal for your project. In my case, I'm using security kit, but you just install it and then you have to configure it a little bit, but anything else that you haven't actually told them that you accept will not be loaded on the website. Next, WebP, also a known topic. So just quick, WebP is a new more or less new image format that's supposed to supersede the older versions, JPEG, PNG, and GIF. And it's now well supported in every browser. There are two other formats, AVIF and JPEG XLL, which are itself supposed to supersede WebP. As I said, WebP, each and every browser, modern browser, can display WebP images. If you want to have a fallback, you can use a picture element and just tell them loads a WebP image or loads a JPEG image. The browser will go through this from top to bottom. The first image format it knows, it will load. So if it doesn't know WebP, it will go to the next line and then loads a JPEG, and it will work. So you can already use it. And it's easy to use it in Drupal because if your server supports it, you can generate WebP images within Drupal and then put them into your theme. AVIF is not quite there. Edge doesn't support it, but with the same syntax as I shown before, you can, if you have a method to generate AVIF, you can also already use it. It makes the website quite faster. And JPEG is also there, but not usable right now. Then we have Focus Visible. I have a feeling not many people, not everybody knows about it. The last browser who added it was Safari in March last year. Focus Visible is something you can use instead of Focus. The difference is you can now differentiate between mouse and keyboard. Why do you want to do this? For example, if you have a slider and a button for the slider to go to the next slides, you can click on the button, obviously. Now, there's a difference. If you implement hover and focus, or if you implement hover and focus visible. In both cases, obviously, you have a hover effect. And in both cases, if you use the tab key, you can tap and reach both elements. The difference now is this. If I use the mouse and click here on this element and move the mouse away, it's still focused. So it still has a hover effect on it. But if you are on a slider and just use this on a slider, you click on it, you move the mouse away, you don't want to have it in its hover state. And it's not possible to do this any better with focus, but with focus visible it is, because if you click on focus visible and move the mouse away, now it changes its state. And it's still accessible with tab keys because that's what it's for. And it's very easy to change this in existing projects. This is also, as I said, quite supported. Cascade Layers, more or less new. All 5 big browsers added this in spring of last year. Works something like this. If you have an old example with a button and a class, and the class gets a background color and the button gets a background color, this is the usual cascade and specificity. In this case, the greetings class wins because it's a class. If you use Cascade Layers, you define your layers, low, high, and the layer to the right has a higher priority. So in this case, even though in the layer low we still have a class with greetings, the button will get a background color of green because the button is defined in the higher layer. You can use this in projects if you wrap your head around it, how layers actually work, but you can, for example, set layers for reset, defaults, your components, and then overrides. If your projects get more complex, this can get more complex too, because for some reason you can nest your layers. And I think that makes everything more complicated, but it depends on your project and it depends how you want to work with layers. But the idea is to use layers so you don't have to use something like important. As I said, support in all browsers since last year. We now have individual transform properties. This is one of the things that are very easy to understand. The last browser who added this were the Chromium browsers in last August. And the idea is So far, you had to use, if you want to do a transform, you had to do you had to use all three: translate, rotate, and scale. And if you want to change something here on the scale, you had to repeat the first ones, because that's how it works. Now, you can use them independently. You can just say translate, rotate, and scale, and just define each and every one for itself. Works in every modern browser. Of course, everybody will know this. We now have container queries, because the last browser added this was Firefox in February. Works something like this. If you have a post and within it div container card, you can define your post as a container type, and then you can do an add container and define the size of the H2 depending on the width of that container. And the container is always the nearest ancestor to the element you are asking for. This is now, as I said, in all browsers. So when I say you can use it now, of course, it depends on your project. If your project says you have to support browsers that are 2 years old, then you can't use it right now. But if you have a project where you only have to support the actual browsers, then you can. What you may not know is that next to container queries, we also get container style queries. Not yet, but somewhere down the road. Because, in this case, the example would be we have HTML elements, EM, I, and Q, and they have usually font style italic. And if they are in another container which already is italic, you can use this syntax to put them to font style normal. In this case, you don't have to declare an extra container, because in styling, everything is a container. This has very special use cases, but it's not working right now. Maybe you didn't notice, we now have a range syntax. Safari added this in March. Range syntax means, so far, you had to write media queries like this, where you maybe have a minimum width and a maximum width, and somewhere between 400 and 1,000 pixels, you use this media query. Now we have, for the range types, we can use the mathematical comparison operators and write this in another way, like this in the new syntax below. This makes it quite easier and better readable. Can you use this? Yes, if you're allowed to use modern browsers, you can already use this. We have new viewport units. You can use them right now. Chromium browsers added them last year in November and December. You may know the viewport height. And viewport height is quite useful until you find out there's a bug in Safari and you have problems with your mobile design because it didn't work in Safari and you had to find a hack around it. And now we have new units. The L is a large viewport height, S is small viewport height, and D is for dynamic viewport height. Of course, we have the same with viewport width. It works like this. When you have a mobile device and a browser, you have UI elements, and sometimes UI elements are shown and sometimes not. If the UI elements are shown, then you have the smaller viewport. If they are retracted, you have the larger viewport. So you can address each case. And of course, because those UI elements are animated, we have a transition between the states. And this is the dynamic viewport height form. So you can address each and every case now. And yay, all and every browser, every modern browser supports this. We have a new HTML attribute inert, which is supported in all browsers since Firefox added this in April. And it's an easy attribute. You just slam it on an HTML element, and then that element is inert. What does it mean? If an element is inert, this element and all children will be ignored for interactions by the browser. That means if somebody clicks on it, there's no click event file, someone can't get a focus, and it will be excluded from assistive technologies. Where would you need something like this? If you have a web page like this, and you can show the upcoming events as soon as this layer is open, you want the web page not to interact in the background. And there are different ways to do this in the past, but the new way is to do this with inert, which makes a lot of things easier. This is a web page I'm responsible for, and at the moment, if you are here and use tabs, you can tap out of it, because I never implemented a focus management for that part. And you can tap out of it, and then you are in the background and tap somewhere around in the background where you shouldn't be. So since I've waited 2 years to implement something for this, I can now use inert. Okay, inert is a global element and is supposed to be implemented for bigger sections of content. If you want to make a single thing, disable a single thing, you should use the disabled styles instead. Also, the inert does not come with a built-in design, so you have to make sure that the user notices that something is inert. For example, with this. It is supported in all modern browsers. We have now new color spaces and functions. And this, on the first few slides, it looks very easy. And if you try to read up on it, it gets very complicated very fast. Let's start easy. We have 2 new color spaces, lab and LCH. With lab has lightness, and A and B stand for how much red-green it has and how much blue-yellow. LCH is better to use because it has lightness, chroma, and hue is easier to read if you want to find a certain color. This works in modern browsers. The colors here are built with these lab values and these LCH values. There's something different in LCH and lab as in the other color spaces, because this new color space is has perceptual uniformity. Never heard of it before last year, because RGB and HSL do not have this perceptually uniformity. And what does it mean? These are colors in HSL. We are only changing the hue, the first value, by 20. And in the first line, there's a noticeable difference between the orange and the yellow. And in the second line, both colors look blue. There's not the same amount of difference between the 2 colors. And in LCH or in lab, this is supposed to be different, because now, when we change the hue, in this case, it's the last variable, the third one. If we change this by 20, the colors are nearer together. It's much easier if you want to manually change colors to know what the change will be. Much easier than in other color spaces. You can already use these color spaces in modern browsers. What's more interesting, the color space is bigger. The idea is that you can build any color humans can perceive with LCH and lab. And nowadays, modern monitors mostly have P3 gamut color space, the area of colors a monitor can display. And if you switch to lab or LCH, you can actually display more colors than with RGB. Looks something like this. The part in the middle is RGB, which we are used to, and what most monitors can display is P3, which gives us more colors, which might be interesting for pages that display photos or maybe art. It just feels, the images just look better. Next to lab and LCH, there are also 2 other new color spaces, OKLab, or color functions, OKLab and OKLCH. They are supposed to be better. And if you try to read up on this, this gets very technical and very irritating. So in short, the experts who have read up on this say both are better choices for developer readability and color modification. You have to try it out for yourself, but you can already use these colors as well. If you want to use these colors, you can use an obvious fallback. Just define a color in a way that's already known, and then override it with one of the new color spaces. And if the browser doesn't understand the new color functions, they will just fall back to the old color they know. There's also a new color functional notation. It works like this. You say color, and then you pick a color space. This color space must be supported by the operating system and the device, of course. Within that color system, you usually pick 3 variables within the color space, and then that color space, that color will be displayed. Color function is also supported in all browsers. You might have noticed that so far when we use RGB or HSL, we always had to use commas, and when we had a fourth variable for the alpha, we also used a comma for that. The new syntax uses spaces, and if there's an alpha value, you use a slash to differentiate it. And because it doesn't make sense to use 2 different syntaxes, you can now use a space-separated syntax for the old color functions. Means that you now don't have to use commas. That also means that you can write your alpha channels with a slash, and that also means you don't have to differentiate between RGB and RGBA. Also supported in all modern browsers. Also new is the color mix function. With this, you can mix 2 colors. Works like this. You tell the browser in which color space you want to operate, then you give him the browser the first color and then the second color, and tell them by which values you want to mix them. If you don't tell the browser the values, the browser will mix it 50-50. And with this, you can make your life a little bit easier, because in the old days, when you wanted to have some lighter versions of a color, you had to use a tool to calculate what the value is. For example, using, if you're as old as me, Eric Meyer's color blender, for example. And then you can get the other values and use them. Nowadays, you can just color mix your colors and just tell the browser to use 20% white, 80% crimson, or whatever you like. The colors are all, as this also already works. And if you, I tried to figure out if there was really the same colors. And there might be little differences. Here, for example, looks a little bit different. That depends on the algorithms that are used. Color mix can be used in each and every modern browser. Something that cannot be used in every browser, relative colors. Because it isn't complicated enough already, we can now build relative colors. With relative colors, you could come to the idea that you only use one color as your base, and each and every other color you need, you do with relative colors. Works something like this. For example, if we start with the color red, we can tell the browser that we want an HSL color. We are starting from our color red. We now have the channels for the hue, the saturation, and the lightness, but we want to change the lightness by 20%. And now this calculation will be done by the browser, and we have a relative color. Well, not right now. In Safari we have, but someday in the future we will have relative colors. There's a web authentication API. The idea is, it's a security idea. People use the same password everywhere. That's not safe. Also, we have accessibility concerns because not each and everyone is able to remember a password or handle passwords. So the Web Authentication API is meant to build a better system for that. And you log in, for example, with your phone and your fingerprint. Of course, different players have to support this. The browsers, of course, probably the content management systems and or modules for those systems. And then it has to be tested and so on. But so far, it looks like as soon as Firefox decides to implement this, we might be able to use this somewhere in the future. There are also, I don't know, something around 4 or 5 Drupal modules in development for web authentication. This is an easy one, text wrap balance. You can use it right now. It's not supported in each and every browser, but it doesn't break anything. The idea is, if you have a headline, for example, and you have one long line and another line that's short, text balance will try to make both lines as similar as possible, which is better readable and it looks better. Example, this is already working in Chrome. If you have this headline and the first example is how it usually looks, and the second is if you have text wrap balance activated. Only supported in Chromium browsers, but as I said, it doesn't break anything in the other browsers, so you can already use it. Next to text wrap balance, we are getting another text wrap sooner or later. It might land in Chrome 117, and this is text wrap pretty. Those are both similar, but pretty is meant for the last line. If there's only one word in the last line, the browser will try to make it so that in the last line there's not just one word. In typography, you would call this an orphan, and you don't usually want to have this. This will take some while. There isn't any can I use page for this yet. CSS Nesting, you probably heard about that one too. It will be available pretty soon. It works like it works in preprocessors. You're just nesting your CSS. Most browsers are supporting it nowadays, but Firefox is not, but it's planning to. Has also one of those things that probably most front-end developers will have heard of. It's a parent selector, and it will be usable as soon as Firefox decides to implement it, or there are polyfills for it. I haven't tested those. But we can use as an example this. We have a teaser, and we have a teaser with an image. And what you usually do is you have 2 classes for that, teaser, teaser image. What you can do nowadays is you ask if the teaser has an image and then implement different styles. This version, you can do anything you need. It depends on the design a little bit, but it can do anything you need within CSS. In this older version, you would have to know something about, in Drupal, you have to know something about Twig and how to get the classes in the right places. But with the new syntax, you don't have to do anything in your theme. CSS is enough for this as example. You can do other things. You can ask if a figure has a fig caption. You can ask if the a element has an image as a direct child. You can also pipe this. The last 2 examples are the same. As I said, it works in modern browsers, but not yet in Firefox. There will be a View Transitions API. You can currently test this in Chrome, Edge, and Opera. These are, for the moment, only planned for single-page applications. They are meant to help you with creating animated transitions between 2 states. The example looks like this. The base example is a normal fade, which is quite boring. But you can do more stuff with it. You can actually define which elements should move independent from each other. and then have animations for those. And here was a real example. This looks quite nice. Also has a little bit of usability in it, because if you click on something and then that element moves to another position, it helps the people to understand that this is the same element as before. It currently only works for single-page applications, but the idea is to make this possible for transitions between two different pages. As I said, it's not working right now, only in the Chromium browsers. There you can test it. On the other hand, it's quite easy to build this with a fallback, so only support this in the browsers that can do the single page, the view transitions. And for those who can't do the view transition, you just change the DOM like you did before. Another new thing, the popover attribute or the popover API. The idea is to build a consistent and flexible mechanism for displaying popover content without people necessarily needed to write their own JavaScript. Works like this. This is a pure HTML version. You have a button with a popover target, and then you have an ID with that popover, and as soon as a button is clicked, automatically the popover pops up. And this works in Chrome, for example. So there I have this button, and if I click it, the pop-up pops up. And if I click now somewhere here, it's closed automatically. And I don't have to do anything with JavaScript, because HTML is all I need in this instance. You get a few extras. The pop-up automatically gets to the top position within the set index. You don't have to manipulate that. You have a light dismiss functionality. That means you can click anywhere besides the pop-up, pop-over, and it closes. It has default focus management. Once the popover is open and you tap, you get into the popover. You have keyboard bindings. Hitting the escape will close the popover. And yeah, you can do anything with HTML, and you don't necessarily need JavaScript. Makes it far more easy. So far, you can use it in Chrome and Edge, but not in real projects right now. If you have paid attention or maybe know about the dialog element, you might ask yourself, why do we need a popover when there's already a dialog element? And they are meant for different things. In the modal dialogs, the rest of the page is automatically rendered inert, so that only the content within the dialog is interactable with. This is, for example, if you have a cookie banner, and the cookie banner pops up, you want the people to click on a button, so it has to stay up, and the rest of the page needs to be inert. So that would be an example for the dialog. But if you have something like a tooltip, then the popover might be a better idea. We will be getting scroll-linked animations. Not yet, but they can be enabled in the Chromium browsers. And they work like this. You have a normal animation, but instead on using time for the animation, you can use a scroll bar. In this example, if you scroll up and down, you get the red bar at the top, which tells you how far along you are on the website. And it's all made with CSS, and you just need a scroll bar. You can build more fancy examples, like this one, where you scroll and you have the animation with the album covers. You don't have this right now. You will maybe have it somewhere in the future, but you can test it if you, for example, in Chrome, if you enable it via a flag. We are getting initial letters, and you might say, we already have something like this. Yes, we have the first letter, pseudo class, but when you use this, and you might want to make the first letter of a paragraph bigger, you have to tell it the font size, and this can be quite a hassle. And initial letter makes this easier, because now we can say that the first letter should be, for example, 3 lines high, or 4 lines high, or whatever. And this already works. In Chrome, for example, here I just told them to make the first letter 3 lines high. There's something else which you can add to this, the position of the letter. This part is not working right now in browsers. So the initial letter itself you can use, but you can't tell them the correct position, and you can't use it in Firefox at the moment. We will be getting a new element, the search element, sooner or later. It will take some time. The idea is we have 8 area landmark roles, and every landmark role has a native HTML element. For example, the banner is a header element. For content info, you use footer. For main, you use main. For navigation, you use the nav element. But so far, one of those landmark roles, search, doesn't have a corresponding HTML element. And the idea is to give it a new element, and that is a search element. Just use it like this. If you have a search form, you just put the search element around it. Not supported in any browser right now. And even if the browser support it, you might have to wait till the screen reader support it as well. We might be getting something like if else. It's called here when else. It was an official proposal draft by Tab Atkins Bittner in 2018, but in the meantime, it made its way into a public working draft. And the idea is to chain different rules together and add an else rule. This is the usual example, which we can do right now. We can ask CSS for a media query, or if the browser supports display flags, and then do this or do that. With the new syntax, the idea is that you can chain or combine media and supports, for example. Then you do A, and if that doesn't fit, then you can do add else and ask for other things, and then add else as well, like you would do in a programming language. Now, the question is, why is this when else and not if else? And that's because an add if would conflict with the preprocessor sus, because this has an add if already. Not supported anywhere right now. This is quite new. We will get an anchor positioning. The idea is that you can define an anchor positioning where an element can be positioned relative to one or more other elements. For example, you might want to position a tooltip centered and above the targeted element, unless that would place the tooltip off screen, in which case it should be below the targeted element. And usually you could do this with JavaScript, but the idea is to build this with CSS one day. The syntax or the example looks a little bit complicated because you need clamp and you need to wrap your head around it, what's going on. We don't need to go into this right now because the syntax might change anyway. So let's just keep in mind, maybe we get something in the future for this. There's something called WAI adapt. You can't use this right now and will not be able to use this in the near future. The idea is as follows. People have very different needs. There are many people with cognitive and learning disabilities that affect their ability to interact with the web. And the idea is to make it easier for them. There are different methods for that. One example is you could define a paragraph as adapt simplification critical and another as medium. And people who are overwhelmed by too much text on websites might then in their browser choose only to display the critical information. In this case, the actual weather. And more information would only distract them, so they can blend it out. Another example would be that you add adapt symbols to your website, and each symbol has a number, and the number corresponds with an icon. And the idea of the draft is you have here your title, how to make a good cup of tea. And if the user switches on the icons, then the browser will show the icons, and the icons are meant for those people who understand icons better than text. So it's not for everybody, and that's because you can switch it on and off in your own browser. And if you prefer other symbols, your browser might show you other symbols. And this example, usually an editor wouldn't add those symbol numbers in a headline, but you could use this, for example, if you have a home or contact form or other stuff in your navigation that would make it easier for people with disabilities. You would actually implement this in your theme. So that would probably be the better example here. And we might get someday a CSS toggle. This is currently just an unofficial proposal draft. The idea is to use CSS instead of JavaScript for anything that can be toggled. For example, if you click on a button to change the color scheme between dark and light, or if you use a tab to open other tabs, or accordions, that's the word that should be here, or carousels. Usually what we do in JavaScript, we just add or remove a class and do everything with that class. For example, if there's a color scheme, you push a button and then the body gets a class to indicate that this is color scheme A or color scheme B. The idea is here that we can do this with CSS. It might look something like this, that we have HTML and we have a toggle for root, and the code name for that or the keyword is mode. And we have 3 different versions, auto, light, and dark. And then there's a button, and if you click on that button, the trigger for mode, it triggers the mode, and that means the mode goes from one value to the next. It cycles through it. And there will also be a syntax to change your CSS depending on the current mode. This syntax will probably change in the future, but this is one of the things I'm most excited for in the future, because of a lot of stuff I'm doing with JavaScript, where it's just change a class, could be done in CSS. And that's all. And not even 45 minutes. Okay, I was a little bit concerned because these are 160 slides and I didn't know if I would be able to do this in 55 minutes, but it worked. This is the only address you need for the moment, because there are the slides and there is a little bit more. The slides, if you go to this URL, will start with a long link list where you get all the links you need to get more information. I've also added a few topics I didn't put in the slides or had to remove because I already had enough. For example, there is in discussion a way to transition to display none, which is quite interesting. And you get a few links if you want to stay up to date, because sometimes people ask me where I get my information from, and I find them on the internet. For example, there. So this is the address. Okay. Questions? Yeah. Okay, let me start with a question. Is there anybody who knew about all of these examples I gave? Okay, good.
Hi, great speech. I have a question regarding the viewport units, and I don't know if you ever had that problem that if you use 100 VW, within a desktop browser, you have a problem with the scroll bar. Do the new measurements take the scroll bar as a calculation in, or?
Actually, I don't know. Good question. I had those problems too, and in my case, I always worked with 100%, and then I didn't have that problem anymore, because 100% was. I don't know if it works everywhere, but in my cases, it fixed my problem.
Yeah, sometimes you have to override the width of the parent, and then you can use 100 VW instead of 100%. And unfortunately, the 100 VW doesn't measure the scroll bar, and it depends on the browser if that scroll bar even gets measured in. So
I don't know right now.
Okay, thanks nonetheless.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Moment.